the learning really never stops. And the moment you think you've learned enough, that's when you lose your humility. And humility is a really important part of being successful. As long as you're helpful and you're humble, you're good.
Eric Siu is an investor, founder, and advisor. He is the chairman of the digital marketing agency Single Grain, which has worked with companies such as Amazon, Uber, and Salesforce. He's also the host of 2 podcasts, Marketing School with Neil Patel and Leveling Up, producing over 3,000 episodes. Leveling Up is an entrepreneurial podcast where he dissects growth levers that help businesses to scale.
What's up, people? Before we get into this video, please make sure to subscribe, like, and comment down below so we can get bigger and better guests for you every single week. Let's get straight into the video right now. Let's kick off. Eric, I really appreciate this. For someone who's 3 years into their journey with podcasting now, looking at someone like you just makes me realize how many levels there are to this game. In the game of podcasting, in the game of entrepreneurship, content, business, life, there's always someone ahead of you, which is good in many ways. It doesn't mean that I'm deaf by comparison, but it's always given me a good barometer. So for context for people, in your first year of podcasting, you had 270 downloads a month. Year 2, you had 900 downloads a month. Year 3, you had 100,000 downloads a month. You're going on to do 100 million downloads in total. Marketing School has 2,000 episodes. Leveling Up has 1,021 episodes. I have 181, and I would think that is pretty good at that stage, right? So what has made you stay in the arena for this long in this game?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me, Darren. I'm happy to be here. So for me, the reason I've done over 3,000 podcasts on my own stuff is more so to satisfy my hunger for learning. It's not to get the downloads. It's not to try to become famous or anything like that. Like the downloads come afterwards, the leads come afterwards, all that stuff, right? And because when you cited my first year, 270 downloads a month and then 900 downloads a month, it's really not that much at all. And I told myself in the beginning, I was really discouraged, and I was like, man, I'm spending all this time and effort on it. I don't have much to show for it. But then I reframed my mindset into thinking, I'm really talking to these amazing people, and these conversations are happening for free. Usually I have to pay a lot of money for these conversations to happen. Yeah. And at the time I was trying to save my failing agency that I acquired doing these podcasts, acquired an agency, didn't know how to run a business. So I was getting on these podcasts, asking a lot of questions selfishly, and I was learning a lot. So to me, my rate of learning was much more important than the rate of downloads.
Of course. And I think for you, it's hilarious because you've been access to these enormous amount of people, throughout your time recording every single week. And I'm the exact same, right? It's very, very similar. So I was young, dumb, 24 years old, had no idea what I was doing. And I was getting conversations like yourself, like Chris, just insane entrepreneurs basically for free. And people spend $10,000 to do this, right? You made a very good point about the student. And this is very important to me. The playing the student or playing the guru, basically. And for you, I can see you as that lifetime learner and someone who's always willing to learn more and be the student. That's obviously been a huge part of your business, Single Grain, as well as your podcast. And most people denounce the student and take on the title guru at 21 years old. So how have you seen that even benefit you from being that student?
Yeah, I think the learning really never stops. And the moment you think you've learned enough, that's when you lose your humility. And humility is a really important part of being quote unquote successful, however you look at it. And it helps you keep an open mind too. And so, for me, a lot of people ask me, like, these books back here, are they real, right? Yes, they're real. But also, how many of them have I read? It's like, that's the wrong question. The right question is, how are you looking at your library? And for me, the library, like my physical books that I have, like I have physical books over here too. At the end of the day, it's just, they're all reference points, right? So I'm just constantly trying to figure out any angle I can to get better. And I'll leave you with one more thing here. I used to think wealth was all about how much money you have or the things you have, right? When you're younger, in your early 20s. And, as I get older, I realize that wealth is not really tied in with any physical thing. It's more so knowledge, because knowledge lives beyond you. It lives beyond me. It lives beyond Bitcoin. It lives beyond cash. It lives beyond any physical, tangible asset, right? And so for me, knowledge continues to compound. And so the most important thing to do is to just try to continue to learn and then teach and then continue that cycle.
100%. I think that's the reason why you stay in the arena, right? Because the exchange of information is, you can do it through genes, which is like true family, or through memes, which is true information. And I think that's like such a beautiful way to look at it, because your podcast has just been always that source. Forget the leads, forget the connection. You've been able to develop that. And it was the exact same for me, right? Exact same. Same for, people like Danny Miranda, which I know you know quite well as well. He was developing his thought process through his podcast, which I think people are more afraid of doing, and we can kind of get into why that is as well at times, to put yourself out there. But I just want to go back to the connection between your podcast / content and your business. How have you seen the principles that you've applied to your content affect or impact your business too, in terms of the discipline you've had, the consistency you've had through the years?
Yeah, that's a great question. So what I would say is, when I think about the business itself, we have three core values. One is to be improve and obsessed. The second one is to be open-minded, and the third one is to be reliable. And that all ties in with my own teaching, my learning and my teaching stack. We hold people accountable to these values. And I used to think core values were a bunch of baloney, but they do matter. And one of the things I would say that maybe is important. Like it's one thing to have core values. It's one thing to live them as the leader or the visionary, but it's also another thing to hold people accountable to them. And that's probably the one thing I would say would make the biggest impact. Like if you are a creator and you're looking to start a business, you can have all the things, you can lead by example and all that, but if you aren't able to hold people accountable to those values, your business isn't going to grow as quickly as you do. And the business, like a lot of people say, like the business's personal growth is really dependent on the founder's personal growth, but it's also dependent on the team members' and personal growth as well.
So your business is often a reflection of you. So where you are mentally, where you are physically, in terms of your state of being. And I've learned that myself. So even our company is a agency / media company. And I've seen that develop in terms of when I've got a bit more mature, just as a person, our principles and the way we apply business is just completely different, right? It's less like anxious, it's less like rushing, less trying to get like something quick wins. We're thinking longer term. Now, you've had Single Grain since you're 27. The story is pretty remarkable how you took over this agency, you acquired at 27. I am 27 right now, so there's a lot of similarities, in the story.
Yeah.
But I didn't acquire a company; I built the company. So I think acquiring is probably more difficult, especially if you don't know how to buy companies, right, or so on and so forth. But agencies get a lot of shit. You had a background in tech, similar to myself as well, and like, how have you seen some of the better agencies rise to the top over time? Because they get a lot of bad rep, right? And even when I work with agencies, I find sometimes they can be slower, they can be less focused on the individual. They're always looking at kind of bigger accounts and client acquisition. But you've had this agency running for years, and it's obviously super successful, working with NASDAQ, Salesforce, so on and so forth. So like, what has it been for you to be able to get to the top and stay there?
I mean, so the reason the agency has been successful, one, it's because of the people. And when I took it over initially when I was 27, I didn't know how to run a business, and I actually made it go from bad to worse. And I also thought that because I worked in tech, I worked in SaaS, I worked in education, that my poo-poo didn't stink, and that agency businesses, they're unscalable, they're not sexy, the valuations are low, the multiples aren't that great, blah blah blah, right? All of that's untrue. Now I look at it, and I'll come back to answering your question, but
Yeah.
now that I look at it, it's like agencies are a fantastic business, and in a down economy like we are in right now, they're cash flowing assets. Most people don't know that when your agency has over 5 million in profit, your multiples can actually be fairly high. Now, this is like pre 2022. All that being said, it's like agencies are a fantastic business, and any business is really a fantastic business when it's able to scale and you're able to hire more people. Because here's the thing, right? Some of the largest agencies in the world, they're doing billions in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Some of the largest companies in the world, I mean, they're like trash companies, for example, right? You just never know that they're doing a couple $100 million a year. And so it's really the grass is greener where you water it.
Mm-hmm.
And so in terms of going back to answering your question around scaling it, it's a lot of compounding around our SEO. It's a lot of compounding around the podcast. It's a lot of compounding around, hey, doing really small speaking gigs in the beginning and then leveling up to do bigger ones. And everything ties back to just compounding. It's the same thing with the relationships, right? Whether it's your friendships or your spouse or whatever, you get what you water, and then you see how it looks in 10 years, 20 years or so, and then you'll be amazed at the growth.
100%, man. So leaning into that a second, I always looked at, what was a better business model? Was it,
VC-backed tech companies, this and this and this. And basically, it's whatever you put your mind into, you can grow. And Hormozy always says this, right? It's like, it doesn't matter what vehicle you pick to some degree, whether you just go all in on it and you really improve on it. And this really stood out to me when I was listening to My First Million with Neil Patel. And Sam Parr was like, I always had such a bad negative of thoughts about agencies. And Neil said, a dollar is a dollar, no matter where it comes from here or where it comes from there. At the end of the day, we're getting paid in dollars, and that's all that matters, right? So, and he's obviously done incredibly well with his agency. So I kind of feel like that a lot of young entrepreneurs will stumble up on this and say, which vehicle should I be in? And I came from a $33 billion company that grew incredibly well over like 5 or 6 years to building an agency, a business agency. And I've really enjoyed the process, and it's done pretty well in the meantime. So what would be your lesson to kind of entrepreneurs who are like literally stuck in the weeds trying to find their thing, basically?
Yeah. And so I think a 20-year-old me listening to this would be like, listening to me say this would be, oh my God, that's baloney. So here's what I will say. It's in your 20s, you're going to experiment a lot, but get over that quickly. The sooner you get over that, the better, because I didn't get over the experimentation, like doing a bunch of things all the time. It's like one thing, I have like a quiz SaaS company, then I'm doing this education thing, then there's a senior living thing. And then there's like, then I was going to go into helping my friends with like their vape flavor thing. Right. And it's just too much stuff. And so at the end of the day, you realize that all the stories you hear around focus, it's like, here's the quote. If you want to become rich, you focus on one business. And if you want to maintain your richness, you diversify. But you have to focus on one business first. And the story Neil and I like to share on the podcast quite a bit is that, you can't quite see here, but Warren Buffett, I believe, is over here in the statue. You can't quite see it. But, he has said this. The story here is when people ask Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, what's the secret to their success? They both wrote one word on a piece of paper separately. And when they flipped it over, it just said focus, right? And it's a very unsexy thing to say. Like, most people don't want to focus. And when it comes to investing, most people don't want to wait, right? But if you focus, you wait on one thing. If you want to build something generational, you wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years or so. You work hard, and then you should have, tens of millions of dollars. Like, I don't see any world where you don't.
Yeah. All right, people, we're just going to take one short little break for a little update about Podcast University. So if you enjoy podcasts like this and you want to start your own podcast, head down to the links down below to Podcast University. This is a learning platform that I've built to help people like you build, launch, and scale your own podcast. I wasted many years doing this, making it all up as I go. So I put everything together in a very seamless and easy to follow course for you guys to follow and just learn exactly how to do it. So if you want to bypass a lot of the mess with your podcast, check out the links down below to Podcast University, and I will show you exactly how to launch and scale your own podcast.
100%. Have you ever read Persuasion by Robert Cialdini?
No, I've only read Influence. Yeah.
You should definitely read it. It's a really, really good book. He breaks down the concept of focus. And basically, the whole concept around the book is what's focal is causal. So if you're just building this agency and it's all your focus, you can grow it, you can scale it, so on and so forth. But if you have like 4 different things going on, you don't really focus into anything. And he broke it down from an interrogation perspective, that if I just focus on one particular thing, that scientifically I can't focus on 2 at the same time. So you might think you can multitask and do all this stuff and be a productivity guru, but at the end of the day, for every nanosecond, there's one piece of focus. So I always extrapolate that back into the business, back into anything. It's all about focus. And I even feel that I didn't interrupt you, but between kickoff sessions...
I would argue this.
Go ahead.
So Darren, I would just argue this, right? I think you can try to do multiple things. You're just not going to do them as well as someone that focuses, right? And so I'll give you an example with my YouTube channel. We used to get, in some cases, 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 views per video. And in a lot of cases, at least 20 to 50,000 or so. And this was 5 or 6 years ago. And what happened? Well, I stopped being consistent on YouTube and I started talking about other things on YouTube, and the channel, it didn't do as well anymore, right? And it's because I started to not focus. That's a microcosm there. But also on the business side, I started doing other things too, right? And so sorry to cut you off, but I just wanted to add that in.
No, when you were actually leading me to the exact same point. I was saying that between Kickoff Sessions, my podcast, and Voix, my company, I feel I'm going between 2 different things, and it's too much. So if that's too much with 2 things that are both podcast related, they're both in the podcast industry, then what good do I have if I'm doing a cleaning agency and then a SaaS company and then this, right? And of course, there's
Yep.
exceptions to the cause. Like someone like Alex Ramosi, you know, he has like an incredible level of discipline no matter what he does. But for the vast majority of us, you know, imbeciles, we are not in that, in that category. So we need to be much more conservative about how we use our energy, right? And just bringing us back to your work, and this is why, you know, someone like yourself who publishes content, it's so valuable because we can bring it back to the original date. In May of 2015, you wrote a Medium article about the two most important traits as an entrepreneur. One of them was what you work on, and the second was who you hire. So for us focusing back on what you choose to work on, how important has that been over the past 8 years, right, since you wrote that article?
Yeah, I totally forgot I wrote that. That's helpful. I mean, it's funny. I should take my own advice, right?
Yeah.
But it is what you work on, and it is who you hire, right? But I would just say this. I mean, even Hormozy himself, you know, when I talk to him, it's like, he's not infallible. He's made those mistakes as well. He had like 6 or 9 different businesses going at once, and I think you know this as well. And so I think it's like entrepreneurs need to eat poo poo first before you really learn your lesson. Like you kind of need to get punched in the face and get humbled. And I'm glad, you know, we're going into this recession. It sounds like a nasty thing to say, but I think the markets just need to crash so people will become a lot more disciplined and people will not be so entitled anymore as well. So, I mean, to answer your question around the focus aspect, how has that gone in the last 8 years? I'll just say this, right? I think, you know, the last couple years, we were doing a lot of different things. Now we've really narrowed it down. Like, you know, even though the SaaS company was doing, you know, fairly well, we're like, no, like, you know, that we're splitting our resources, right? Because at the end of the day, when you think about yourself as an entrepreneur, it's your resource allocator. You know, eventually you become a capital allocator, which is just resources again. But we're splitting resources, engineering efforts, you know, people, like really talented people, and also spending a lot of money on software. And then we're doing this education thing as well. And then, at the same time, you know, I was in the middle of launching a book too. And then we bought two agencies at the same time, right? And then, so with 2 agencies, you have to integrate them at the same time. There's just a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I think even though I say a lot of these things, like sometimes I'm not immune. Like, you know, sometimes you end up making similar mistakes.
100%. So how do you decide between what you should go for and what you shouldn't in that instance?
Yep. So in my opinion, I'll just say for me, I would prefer to focus on something that one has a very large total addressable market. So, you know, how big can the market be? And also what's working, what has the most traction. And it stop, you know, when I have traction on something, not look at the next shiny object and go to the next shiny object. And entrepreneurs have that problem. That's why they call it the entrepreneurial ADD.
Yeah, because everyone's just jumping to the next thing, right? And that's a
They
big.
can't help themselves.
I had a great I had a call with Shan Hanif on Monday. He is I call him the mastermind behind Iman Gadzi. You might know Mike Thurston. Who else? Chris Williamson. He runs a business on the back end. So he does the events, he does the products, the services, the software. Genius guy. Genflow, his company, is going to do 200 million this year. And
Great.
I asked him about this, and he said the best way to think about when people jump between niches is like, let's say you are an American football player, and tomorrow you wake up and play baseball. You're going to be 1, shit at baseball, and 2, get worse at American football. You were already good at it. You could have got to the NFL, but instead you just jumped and started playing baseball, right? And he said it's the exact same in entrepreneurship, but no one sees it that way. They think, oh, Web 3.0, the next AI platform. Let me just get off what I'm doing right now and go build that. And I just think if you think of it in terms of sport, of course it's not going to work, right? And obviously there's exceptions, and you might get right timing and so on and so forth. But from a practical perspective, or just like fundamentals, if we look at the fundamentals, that's what you're playing with, right? It's like sport.
Totally. I mean, here's another analogy for you. So if you look at success like a circle, those of you that can see the video right now, if you start in the middle, but success is on all the, like, we'll call them the edges of the circle, right? You just need to go in a straight line and eventually you'll hit success. But if you keep changing directions all the time, you'll never hit success, however you define it.
And you have to go back, right? You got to go back before you can go forward.
Yep.
I want to ask you even about that, you know, the kind of the guru space and the Twitter space. So you're a big guy on Twitter. I'm actually not at all. But like when you're seeing these younger entrepreneurs coming through, like they claim to be the guru, does that like frustrate you in any way? Because you know you've put in the hard work yards in comparison to nearly everyone else.
It doesn't really frustrate me because eventually they the time like they will be discovered, right? And that's their problem, and hopefully they get humbled by it. And if they continue down that path and they don't get discovered, I think there is going to be an internal disconnect. And so eventually everyone learns their lesson. That is the hope, right? I think I've seen it like over the years, a lot of the internet marketers or digital marketers over the years, the ones that weren't doing things above water, they've been humbled and they've kind of disappeared. Whereas the ones that have been consistent, they've focused, they've been good people, they've been humble, they've just continued to just do good work. And those are the ones that rise over time. And eventually you just want to look at the people that have been around for 10, 20, 30 years or so. I mean, again, you look at Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. Charlie Munger is 99 years old. Warren Buffett's 97 years old and just been doing the same damn thing over and over and over.
I think it comes a bit of a disconnect when you have people that read books like Robert Cialdini Influence and try to get authority, right? And they know that I need authority, so they're going to pretend like they have the authority without the results. And that's, I think, how Hormozi describes it, is like confidence without results is delusion. So, and that's a big thing, because like people want to be respected, they want to have the authority, and they want to show that they've done the results, but they've been in the game 6 months. So there is an element of being humble. And my first 3 clients paid me $0, and it was the best experience ever. I learned more, I would say, than the people that have paid us a lot more, right? Because as a result, we follow the student, become the student, and keep on going from there, which is really important, right? I want to ask you about the wall of resistance. So your podcast, tough as hell in the beginning, the business was declining, your content, you're jumping between different things on YouTube. How did you kind of break through between the years of 3 and beyond?
Years of 3, is that what you said?
Yeah, so your 3rd year into podcasting or
Oh,
business,
yeah.
or the threshold, basically. When and how did you break through?
Correct. Yeah. So the phrase I always go by, or more of a, I guess, a saying, is it takes 3 years to see success when it comes to content creation or business creation. And for the podcast, I just, going back to the rate of learning, I knew I was learning a lot, so I'm just going to keep doing it. And I knew that eventually it would compound. So that's fine with the podcast. With YouTube, I knew if I kept going, and I was looking at the comments on YouTube, people were really liking it, and I kept talking about marketing. I was like, oh, this is pretty easy. I'll just keep going. That started compound, right? And then we can come back to why I stopped the compounding, in a little bit. But with the business, with Single Grain, so when I took it over when I was 27 years old, again, I made it go from bad to worse. So we dropped all the way down to 1 employee, and my outside accounting firm actually called and said, hey, it might be time to shut it down. And I was like, oh, damn. So I actually interviewed for a job, and this was a job that was paying we're talking 7 figures, right? Multiple 7 figures if I hit numbers. And I had accepted the job, and I was about to move into an apartment in Dallas, Texas. And I was actually looking at apartments there. And at that moment, I realized, he called me the next day. I was like, man, I don't think I can do it, because I'd rather make no money and do things on my own terms
100%.
than to make 7 figures, right? Like once you get a taste of it, you're just like, no. And then so what happened there was I was like, you know what? I'm going to give it my all and see what happens. And we were fortunate enough, our SEO started to kick in. And so we ranked number 1 for digital marketing agency in America for like 2 to 3 years. So the leads started coming in, but we couldn't fulfill the leads. And so what we started to do was we started to sell the leads and we would take 25 to 30% commissions when we referred the leads out. And that led us to, get enough profit to hire people. And then we started to build everything in-house. And fortunately, we're able to hire some amazing people, and then we're able to build the thing back up from scratch. And so for me, it was all about, 1, betting on myself and seeing what would ultimately happen, because that was the whole reason to take over Single Grain in the first place. And then once I started to feel the momentum, the trajectory, I was like, you know what? I think we have something here. Let's just continue to build it. And then, happy to talk about where I get distracted along the way too.
There's a few points I want to get into on that. Just first on the rebuild. How did you have the confidence to know that you could do it?
So when I worked at a startup, maybe 25, 26 years old, the thing I wanted to prove to myself there was, 1, I could hang in the tech world, and 2, could I run a marketing team? Because as a 25-year-old, I was tasked with managing like 12 to 13 people or so, and didn't know how to do that. So I learned a lot there. And a month into the job, the CEO, I paused all the marketing because I wanted to understand what was happening. And then the CEO pulled me aside and said, "Hey, like I noticed you paused marketing. If we don't hit numbers this month, we're gonna have to let you go." And I was like, "That's like not on me. It's like my predecessor. Like, but no excuses, right?" So I bet the entire company on YouTube ads, and then we basically had 4 months of cash left in the bank. It worked out, and we were able to raise our Series B, and boom, off to the races, right? And so at that point, I was like, man, I think I can do a lot more than I give myself credit for. And my entire thing with coming into Single Grain and taking it over was, if I can help blow up a startup that had the right product, the right people, just bad marketing, I wonder if I can turn around a crappy company. And so that was the challenge. That was the entire, theory. Like that was the thesis, right? Can I do it? And we were able to turn it around. So that's why I decided to do it.
And again, that wasn't delusion. You were very much of the belief that, okay, this is the circumstances. It's a declining company. It's more the challenge, right? And of course, you have the gaming.
It's the next level.
Yeah, exactly. And you have the gamer background. Same myself. I was a Call of Duty dude. So like, and there's a lot of similarities between like game theory and entrepreneurship, right? Just going back to, you mentioned there about, how you scale up to like multiple 7 figures. How does that work in your business? Is it more like rev shares? Is it more retainers? Like, how do you approach that?
All right, guys, one short little update for Voix. I want to give a short little overview about my own company, my media company called Voix. So if you are a company or you are an enterprise looking to grow your brand and looking to grow your podcast, feel free to reach out to work with us at Voix. What we do is a fully fledged end-to-end management of your podcast. We take care of the strategy, the consulting, we take care of the growth, the management, we take care of all the editing, all the boring stuff, so you can focus on creating good podcasts and growing your brand. If you want to grow your podcast and get to new users, if you want to grow your business, generate more revenue and all that good stuff, check out the links down below to Voix. You can follow through to schedule a call with our team, or else you can fill out the application form to see if you qualify to work with us. Thank you.
Yeah, so ours, it's traditional agency model. It's very similar to Neil's. We charge retainers, percentage of ad spend, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else beyond that. No, it's just like that. You know why? Let me explain. So those agency owners that are listening. So I used to think, man, if you're going to do an agency, it's about pay for performance. It's about CPA basis, because it can scale really well. And I have some friends where their CPA agencies are doing like $800 million a year. Some are doing like $50 million a year or so. And I was like, that's the way to do it. But based on how my business is set up, we get a lot of leads. We get a lot of leads, and a lot of them are super qualified, and they're used to doing it in a traditional manner. And so for us, we're just like, let's just do what works, and let's not try to get too cute, and just standard blocking and tackling, and just do it good for a long period of time, and you will build something great.
100%. Yeah. So we do something similar. We just do retainers for the most part. And if people want to get a bit sparkly with rev shares, we can do that on certain products that they want to, right? But it's kind of very much on their demand, because we're doing like yearly contracts. And I feel like that people get very caught in the weeds with all this like super, super detail. And then you end up just losing the contract, right? You can just lose it as a result. Talk to me about your experience from like agency compared to like SaaS, or agency compared to tech. Like from your perspective, like what is better?
I don't think there's anything better. Again, I used to think that tech, SaaS, education, they were all better than agency, because it's like, oh my God, agency, client services business, it's not scalable, blah, blah. Yeah, it is. Yeah. What are you talking about? Like, of course you can scale it. You can scale it by hiring amazing people. That's how you scale it. And then you take yourself out of the day-to-day if you need to, if you want to go work on other stuff. Oh my God, the multiples are so bad. What are you talking about? In an up market is 15 to 20x. And so I just think it's a very, again, it's the grass is greener where you water it. And it's where you decide to focus. Again, there's many boring business. Like I'm looking outside, there's a golf course over here. Like, what about the people that have to manage the whole entire property? Like that's a business in itself. I bet you there's a lot out there that are doing hundreds of millions, if not billions a year in revenue, right? And so you just got to think about your total addressable market, what you're actually good at, what you're actually interested in. And if you want to take it one step further, go find your ikigai, right? Like everyone talks about that. Go do that.
100%. And again, the hate comes from people that are below you, right? There are guys that are like looking and observing, whereas I don't imagine a lot of your friends are turning to you saying that your agency isn't scalable, right? Because they understand the levers that you're pulling, the leverage that you have, and the experience you have, which again, you kind of have to get out of your mind with this stuff and just look at business just being much more logical and saying like, look, this is what I'm busy building. This is the total addressable market, and you can go chase that as a result. Now I
Well,
have
like you said, Darren, I mean, look, there's levels to it, right? Like at level one, I mean, if you're playing level one of Mario, it's very simple. You're not fighting Bowser yet, right? It gets more and more complicated over time. So business agency at a larger scale, it's like, well, you're looking to acquire businesses. Well then, what's the next level? Maybe you're looking for international expansion. Okay, well, what happens after that? Well, now with marketing getting harder, well, you should probably think about data. You should probably think about creative as well. With the AI stuff that's happening, what about how do you integrate AI plus marketing too, right? And so there's a lot of different dynamics, and you get to play the more complicated games because you beat the bosses at the lower levels.
100%. How do you compare like that gaming world you came from to entrepreneurship?
I mean, I think everything's a game, right? And my coach, will give me crap about this. He's like, this is not a game in some cases, right? Sometimes we'll talk about like, my relationships, right? And things like, or dating and things like that, right? But like there is a game to all this, right? And so, let's look at this podcast, for example. My selfish reason for doing this, besides meeting you, the other reason is like I have content and now I can chop it up, and I don't need to go do another session. For you, it's like, okay, maybe there's an angle where it helps you grow your podcast, right? And maybe you get to learn a thing or two, right? So like we're all looking to get something from each other, right? And so there's a game to everything, and same thing with business. It's like, how do you rise into like a VP? How do you become a CEO? Like, well, you have to like, by the way, if you don't gain the necessary experience and you become a VP, there will be a moment where you get knocked down again and you'll get exposed because you just didn't have the requisite experience, right? So like, well, with games, you get XP, you get experience points. So everything's a game to me.
100%. And even traditional careers, they have a ladder. Like it's literally a career ladder. So I like to think
Yep.
through that, right? Because, even sport, even training, as I come from like an endurance, a bodybuilding background, but I've done endurance running as well. And it all comes down to numbers and theory and metrics, right? And the more you get
Yep.
granular with it, the better it becomes,
Yep.
right? I have to ask
Yep.
you about, how you've developed your network, because of course the podcast has been a huge lever for you, exactly for me. So, you've been around people like Sam Ovens, Hormozy, so on and so forth. But for you, you've mentioned before that you've kind of got yourself into these rooms, got yourself into these tables. What were the biggest levers you pulled, do you think, or were able for you to get into these situations?
It's interesting. When I first met Layla Hormozy, so we're hanging out in Vegas. So Alex, Layla, and I, and Layla asked me, she was like, "What's your superpower?" Right? And what rolled off my tongue was, what I'm really good at is connecting different people, concepts, and ideas. And so, even these books over here, different concepts, you would apply them to different businesses or like different conversations. Or let's say, Darren, you needed something, like you're like, oh, I need this. Oh, you should talk to this person over here, right? And so that's what I've always naturally been good at. And what I would say is, let's say I'm trying to make this practical for everyone too. When I started networking, quote unquote, I was always coming from a place of, hey, what can I do for me? Like, what do you need? And how can I make that connection? And I never wanted anything back. And that takes a long time to compound. And then when you combine that with you're creating content, you're doing podcasts, and at the very end, you're asking, how can I help here? And then you're actually starting to build some friendships here and there. All these things start to compound slowly. And to me, it's for the most part, a lot of doing favors. A lot of it's for free, right? It's just making an intro or trying to be helpful, maybe passing on some research or something like that. And so I've never really, I know that the Zig Ziglar quote here is, if you help others get what they want, you'll get whatever you want. And I've been doing that pretty consistently for maybe the last, call it 13 years or so. So it's 13 years of compounding. And the other thing, I'll give you a practical hack that you can do is, I really like getting people together for dinners, right? Like that's one of the things. And in the very beginning, let's say when I was 27 years old, when I took over Single Grain, I was broke. I didn't really have money. And so what I did was I hosted a little dinner mastermind at my place, and it was people around my level, because I was looking for marketers, either executives or like VPs of marketing or CEOs, and I had them come over to my house. And I didn't even have food. Like I had a half-eaten bag of chips that I just threw into the middle of the table, right? And people are like, okay, what the hell, right? But the thing is, like, I just love to bring people together, and I know that as long as I play the connector, things will come back to me, and I don't have that expectation.
I was going to ask you, what did you cook? But you obviously didn't cook anything.
Well,
But
hey, round two is round two we had a little more money, and then so we ordered Greek food for everyone, and it
oh,
turned out to be
nice.
pretty good.
I love
Yeah.
that though, right? Because so I'm obviously at a fraction of the size that you're at, right? But even at that level, when you get a small bit of like I would say like attention, people try to take shit from you all the time, right? And you have to be very cognizant of it. You understand like what's true, what's bullshit, like what's the reality, and it's just part of like human nature that people try to like absorb stuff, right? So the fact that I always, to your point, I'm always like, how can I help you? Can I give you clips? Can our editors create content for you? Can we do anything? And the only other person I heard ever say, what's your superpower, was Dan Go. Dan was on my podcast, and I was like, dude, like, what can I help you with? He was like, what's your superpower? And that was the first time it made me think, being like, okay, there is something that I can basically package and be of value to other people and serve other people, right? Because when you serve other people, you ultimately serve yourself. And I think it's just like, when you're thinking long term, like you have 13 years, I've been 3 years at this. Yeah, you think in decades, or you don't think in terms of weeks. But it just seems weird that this is not the common thing, though. Do you find that too? Like the fact that most people don't think like this.
They don't. I mean, that's why they're most people, right? And so it's it's interesting. I was talking with my chief of staff today. We're walking, and she made an interesting comment. She's like, so and so on the team seems to have an employee mindset, and she's only 24 years old. I was like, that's a very perceptive thing to say at your age. And I was like, what do you mean by employee mindset? It's like, well, they just don't seem to think long term, right? And this is why, like, by the way, like if you offer equity or profit sharing, most people don't seem to understand it because they have more of a short term mindset, right? I think to develop that mindset, you have to just be a sponge. You have to go talk to people. You have to go listen to podcasts, go read books, and you'll find through pattern recognition that the most successful people are the ones that are always trying to learn. They're always trying to get better, and they're very long-term focused. Because then what happens is you study their results, and Warren Buffett didn't become really, really rich until he was like 50 years old. Like he was rich, sure, but really, really rich, like billionaire status, that took a long time for him to compound, right? So
Have you ever interacted with Eric Jorgensen, the guy that wrote Naval's book?
yeah,
Yeah. So
great guy. He just released a new book yesterday. So
he was on my show last week, and the way he thinks is literally wild. It's like, if you imagine a chessboard and people are like, think 2 steps ahead. He's like 8. He would be thinking, we would discuss something to do with health, like it could be like longevity or wearables, and he would like, yeah, if you connected this with this and then we solve that problem, then you would be at this problem. But he's like, it probably take like 40 years. But he's like, I've already invested in 4 companies that did it. And I remember I was just like, dude, you are so far ahead. And I was like, what age are you? He was like, oh, I'm like 34. I was like, you have a 90-year-old investor perspective. And he's like, yeah, it'll come true in like 20 years. Like he was talking about some like a really niche like biomedical thing. I was like, I have no idea what you're on about, but I imagine that you have pretty much thought about this really clearly. And I think it's very interesting because he still has his short-term stuff, which is his books. He bought he's CEO of a publishing company now, and so on and so forth. But I thought it's very interesting to observe, right? Huge success.
So
Thinking long-term. Go ahead.
here's an example, right? You're talking about Eric right now, and literally what I do, you can't really see it right now.
Yeah,
We'll
I
do
see
like
it.
this, right? I just texted him, and okay, look, he just responded instantly, right? So it's like, if you can see it, it's like, hold on.
Yeah,
Let's do this.
got it.
So I'm just like, hey, anyway, I'll just read it. You want to do a pod to promote the book, right? It would be an honor and a privilege, right? So it's just like taking advantage of, like, you inspired an idea, and I'm just gonna pick up my phone and text him, right? That's what it takes. It's just trying to be someone that's helpful, and as long as you're helpful and you're humble, you're good.
100%. And also, doing the work, because for instance, Eric released that book and so I messaged him and I was like, hey dude, like I didn't know him, right? I'm not trying to pretend I know anyone. I never try to pretend that I'm friends with people I record with either. That's like the worst virtue signaling you do. But I messaged him being like, hey, like I'd love to record. And I was like, can you send me the book? I'll pay for it, but can you send it to me? And he was like, yeah. He sent me a PDF. And on PDF, I read the 300 pages in a weekend on my laptop like this. Because, he was coming onto my show. I obviously wanted to do the work to make sure that
Yeah.
like everything worked really well. And I remember
And this is his new book.
this is his
You
new
read the
book
whole thing on PDF. Wow.
on a PDF on
Okay.
my laptop, and I was like this. I was like, I was like,
That's what it takes.
I was like scrolling
Yeah.
like this, and I just thought in my head, I was like, you know, from going from like a level 2 podcaster to level 5, like this is what Chris Williamson's doing on a daily basis. This is what people
Yeah.
have to do. And even though I'm building the company, I had to set aside like 2 days. And my girlfriend was like, "You're literally insane," and I was like, "I know. I actually need to do
look,
this."
here's what I'll say. Like, so, I still do my podcast in long form. Like, it takes a lot of research, right? Like, I have this, I guess I will virtue signal here. So I have Ali Abdal and Sahil Bloom live in person on Friday. We're doing 2 separate podcasts, and it's a lot of time to research. Like, it's probably at least 4 hours, if not more, per person. And so my coach is just saying this, like, you're a lot more focused now, but I worry about your podcast stuff. And that's a very legitimate concern, right? But the good news is the podcast drives more awareness and it drives more leads at the end of the day. So I can make that argument. And plus I get to have great conversations. So there's that.
100%. Similar to myself, right? It's not, I don't do like a B2C product on the back of the podcast. We just have our company. And if I can meet people, so on and so forth, right? When so we thought about the long-term thinking, the long-term vision. When you're around like these types of people, what are some of the things you've observed and how they execute, how they act, how they think on ideas?
Yeah. So each year we do a founders retreat, and I have a couple of my buddies come. One has a WordPress holding company. The other one has like a telecoms company. It does like 300 million a year. And then there's a guy that has a pet holding company. And then there's a guy named Patrick Campbell. He sold his company for a good amount of money. And so we meet, and everyone thinks differently, but everyone's a deep thinker. And what I'll say is we're all in our mid 30s, basically, some maybe early 40s or so. And one is this. So I mentioned earlier, like, be helpful, be humble, but also be hungry, right? Everyone has the 3 H's. We'll call them Triple H, right? Like the wrestler. So, and everyone has a long-term focus too. And what I will say is the WordPress holding guy, like Syed, right? That's his name. Syed Balki. A lot of, my first million, they like to talk about him. So he's been laser focused on WordPress probably since he was like 21 years old. And the guy is like 32 years old now or so. And so that's a very long time. Now, when you look at the telecoms company, he's been doing it since, I don't know, maybe 13 years ago, right? And then I look at the pet holding company, it's a little earlier, little sooner, but still like 9-10 years or so. And so he, by the way, like, one of our mutual friends in the group, I'm not going to name names here, but like he brought up the idea. It's like, oh my God, I can work on this new opportunity, porn.ai. And I was like, yeah, that's a huge opportunity, but isn't your other business going pretty well right now? He's like, yeah. And so he's about to start working on porn.ai with his friend, which is a huge opportunity, right? Mm-hmm. But he's like, you know what? I already have something really good here. The grass is greener where we water it. Let's just focus on that.
That's a great
So it goes back to boring stuff that I'm saying.
Yeah, of course. It's like some of the biggest companies in the world are like transport, right? They literally transport like food across water. And funny you mentioned that. A guy I met in the sauna, always great conversation starting in the sauna. He has a pet company. So he started with a supplement company for the gym. And then he was like, this is very difficult. He pivoted into pet supplements, pet food. And I was like, how long are you doing it? He was like, 9 years. First couple of years was doing like 5 figures and 6 figures. And now he's up to like 9, 10. And I was like, how long? 9 years been at this as a result, right? So when you have that cash and you're able to extend your time horizon, that's when it all comes back around. I want to ask you about maybe the future of like marketing for you. So of course you mentioned AI, there's lots of other things going on. Where do you position yourself right now in terms of marketing, and what are you focused on for the next couple of years?
Yeah. Before I talk about that, the one thing I want to add more about in terms of trends with high performance too is we all have peer groups. And so this founders retreat, which I kicked it off maybe like in 2018 or so, it's been the same group more or less, but also being in other groups, right? Like I mentioned, if you're around $1 million, you should look at a group called EO. You can even look at Sam Parr's group, Hampton, right? Or like if you're a little larger, you can join groups like YPO. And then there's a ton of these groups that are worldwide. And what ends up happening is you meet people from all walks of life. They all have different businesses. For example, I was talking to a guy at, I was at like an event in Nashville, Tennessee, and we're just talking. I was like, so what's your business, right? And you would never guess, like, this is, tall guy, really nice guy. He's like, he has the second largest adult films business in Canada, right? And but he's like a totally like normal, legit guy, super smart. He's technical, and you just never know who you're gonna meet. And these people are also connected too because high performers want to hang out with high performers. So I would say the peer group piece, you can call them masterminds, whatever you want to do. Like I would just say make sure that you have your peer group, your group of friends, because they will take you a long way, and you guys will all carry each other.
100%. And of course that goes as well with, your previous group, because like if you're just hanging around with people that like your high school friends, they're going to be basically holding you back to some degree. I don't mean that in a derogatory way. It's just like a fact of life, right? That's why you need to be exposing yourself to podcasts. You need to be exposing yourself to these groups and paying to get in there, right? They're not cheap, but I always think that like obviously price what you pay, value is what you get, right? So if these are people that can help you with a business problem or just a life problem, they're going to be at the same level with relationships, fitness, health as well that you're at, right? And the same priorities. So back to the future.
Totally, it's perspective. Yeah, go ahead.
Back to the future stuff. So I want to lean into the marketing side and the brand side, because for you, of course, you've been working really well on marketing, even within your company. What are you thinking about? How are you looking at the future?
Yeah, I'm really interested right now. We've been testing out a lot of stuff with AI SEO and like programmatic SEO. And so what that means is if you're a TripAdvisor, you have a lot of pages on your site, fun things to do in Rome, things to eat in Japan. You have a lot of these permutations. You can create hundreds or thousands of pages. And this is how a lot of these sites they drive millions of visits, right? And so we've been experimenting with that ourselves and also for clients as well. We have a meditation client that we're doing this programmatic SEO stuff with, but we're also doing this thing we call AI enhanced content. And so with Marketing School, it's a daily marketing podcast, 5 to 10 minutes, and we publish every day, right? And the great thing with it is, the great thing with it now is that we can actually take every single episode and convert it into a long form blog post. And so that would manage maybe 60 to 70% of the work. And then a human being will come in, fact check it, add in internal links, all that type of stuff, right? So all this to say is we're doing this internally right now, but then what we're looking to do is we're looking to build out products that we can give away for free so we can bring in even more leads.
Where's the kind of balance between like AI generated content that's kind of garbage or, well constructed, very helpful SEO content that you're working on? Because Neil was hesitant about that when I mentioned to him. He said that a lot of AI content could come out to be kind of BS.
Yeah. So the good thing with Marketing School is we automatically have a transcript from Riverside, and so which is AI generated. And then we'll just plug that transcript into the OpenAI API and it'll generate a blog post. And for the most part, that's not much of an issue because you're taking a real transcript and you're making it into a blog post, and then we're just adding on to it. So that part's not so much of an issue. Plus, we have a human that's already QAing it. The broader issue would be around programmatic SEO, for example, because if you're creating hundreds and thousands of pages, there will be some gibberish, right? And you can't QA all of them. So we're actively working on a solution right now where we can QA these at scale, because the cool thing is we're creating these pages at scale on the SEO side. We're also able to optimize these from a conversion rate optimization standpoint at scale. And now we just need to make sure we can QA these at scale. So it's, to me, I think this opportunity is probably something that will last for the next year or two because everyone's just going to start doing it. And I think the ones that take advantage early are going to have a nice leg up. And that, to me, this type of service is a nice gateway into all the other services that we have, and then we can just land and expand from there.
It's like a bolt on, right? And then from there you can bring them in and bring them through. So as an entrepreneur versus as the marketer, when you're focusing on, generating leads for your business, what would you kind of advise for someone like that? Are you looking at paid media, or would you focus more on organic, like podcast, Twitter, LinkedIn?
It's difficult for myself because we have a pretty good SEO foothold, and so that does pretty good for us. I would say if I were starting from scratch today, I would go with podcasts like you are right now, and then you're probably doing this already, but you would chop up the content, put it on shorts and all that, aim for discoverability and want them to watch the whole thing. That's what I would do. And then, I would spend a lot of time also posting to LinkedIn and Twitter as well, and just spend like maybe an hour or 2 hours each morning, like if I'm starting out, right? Because it's free to put in the sweat equity, and I would just do that and just understand that it's going to take at least 3 years to build something great, both on the audience and the business side.
I think you mentioned before as well about how difficult how different these platforms are and how to take a flavor. And like for me, YouTube is at like 55K subscribers, LinkedIn's at like 6. On Twitter, I have like nothing because I found it even difficult to apply the principles from our podcast to Twitter because it's very much more like witty or even controversial at times, and that's just kind of
Yep.
not me as a person. So
Mhm.
you might know Ken Yamash. He's a really, really fantastic solopreneur. He's been a big advisor to our company as well. He always says, focus on one platform, but have one warming up. So what would be your kind of process on kind of going deep before going wide?
Yeah, I mean, I'm literally going through this exercise right now where I'm more focused on doing long form in person interviews
Yeah.
because I've just done over 400 of these interviews already. I'm pretty decent at them, I would say. And so, and that's what I enjoy the most. And so people can tell if you're not like, if I were to make a direct to camera video, I don't enjoy doing that. Right. So it's like, okay, what's my zone of genius where I actually enjoy doing it? And so for me, it's like talking to my team is like, your energy is so much more in the long form ones. I was like, okay, I'll just do that.
Yeah.
And then I'll also do these long form ones too, because then we can have, it's an example of me teaching versus like, me being taught. And so I think that's a good balance. And so for me, it's focused on podcast, which means I'm basically focused on YouTube as well. And then the secondaries would be like LinkedIn, for example, or Twitter.
Yeah, and you guys kill it on LinkedIn too, or even on Instagram when you're bringing across, not Instagram, sorry, Twitter, when you bring across these clips, because for like Layla and Alex, you're telling the story really well, but posting natively, which is quite, you're actually doing that very, you're very original in that thought. There's not many people that are doing like specifically Twitter content that's native video versus most people are linking out, even me at times, because
Right.
it's being a bit lazy, right? But that's actually the reality,
Yep.
and that's what makes it more difficult. I want to speak to you
Yep.
about branding. So, you have a very reputable brand, well respected from younger entrepreneurs as well, people amongst your peers. How do you think about brand, and how do you kind of not tarnish your brand, I guess, as you're trying to grow rapidly?
I think the boring answer is focusing on doing the right thing. And so like, all the things all the cliches you hear from the gurus or the stuff you see when you're scrolling through, it's like, here, I'll just put it this way. The word kind sounds cliche, but being kind is probably one of the most selfish things that you can do, honestly, right? Because if you want to get everything that you want, just be a nice person consistently, you will get almost everything that you want, right? Be kind, but also be firm as well. And that's what I would say. Like, it's over the years, I don't think there's any one tactic or whatever I've used to preserve my reputation. But as long as I'm kind and as long as I'm firm, as long as I'm doing the right thing, I don't think I really need to worry.
Hmm. Talk to me about building brand equity. What does that mean?
Yeah, brand equity to me is, so equity. You think about equity in a company, right? Brand equity is continuing to acquire to build up that. Let's think about it this way. If you're building up equity in something, you're acquiring more shares, right? And so to me, as I'm building my brand, I'm trying to acquire more share of voice. And ultimately, like, if I can go from reaching 100,000 people a month to 200,000 people a month to 300,000, that's what matters. Like, I don't care about the followers at the end of the day. I care about how many people I'm reaching. And that to me is leveling up my equity.
Hmm. How do you do that? Like, how do you plan this? How do you strategize this?
Yeah, we have people on the team that are responsible for their KPIs. Like, we're aiming for like a month on month growth rate. We track our reports through Sprout Social. Like, that's like the how, right? But for me, I just want to have interesting conversations, with people that I actually want to talk to. That's a big piece of it as well. And two, I want to be doing cool stuff too and being able to talk about it and, adding my own point of view. Because here's the thing. When you think about the content that works nowadays, one, it's like it's original content, so that means your original thought, or it might be original data that you have too. That's how you create something that stands out. I think that there's a lot of like a lot of people are looking the same, and Neil talked about this as it relates to AI, actually, how there's a Where's Waldo effect. And what that means is everyone, like, when you think about Waldo, it's like you had to used to, like, are you familiar with Waldo?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so you look at the book, you had to like find him, right? But now everyone's starting to look like Waldo because everyone's producing the same stuff, especially with all the generative AI stuff, right? And so, well, then how do you stand out? Well, you have to actually have a point of view, and maybe you have to have some unique data.
And your story, right? That's it. People buy the story, not just the tactics and techniques,
Totally.
because like tactics and
Yep.
techniques are, you can Google it, right? And I always say this about, if people want information, they'd Google it, whereas they come to you for the stories, for the transformations, for your challenges, for your vulnerabilities in many regards, and they stick to that story. And someone who's a master of that is Dakota Robertson. So Dakota, and he spoke about this on The Future with Chris Do. He was saying that like fundamentally people attach to him not for his genius or
Yep.
not for his intelligence, but for his story and the fact that he can do
Yep.
this not in like a bullshit way, right? He's very much telling it organically. I want to ask you about
There's a great book, by the way, called Storyworthy, and I'll just say this: like I've gone to like story workshops and all that. I mean, just making sure that you make a great point, Darren. It's like you have to have a bank of stories to tell, and someone like me that's pretty forgetful, you need to train those stories as well. Some people are just naturals, and then they could just command the table at dinner. Like those are the people you gravitate towards at the end of the day, right? So
Yeah.
anyway, go ahead.
No, of course, and there is a line with this as well, right? Because like you need the stories, you need the transformations, you need to kind of probably think back on your days in single grain more and like sketch them out, right? Because they are very valuable for people, depending on what you're trying to do, right? If you were trying to sell like a get your first 10K agency course, well then that's valuable, but you're not exactly doing that, right? So then there's obviously the spectrum where people are just like making up anything. And I actually heard Jordan Belfort say this to you on the Wolf Den. He was saying that like every 21-year-old these days has this tragic story, and they went against the grain, and now they're here, and now they have a Rolex, and they're in Dubai, right? So there's obviously like this
Yep.
happy medium to find between. You mentioned about in-person podcasts. And that's a huge thing that I'm focused on as well. Just because I'm based in Asia, I can't always get that access. Something I'm trying to work towards more. How do you think about that from your own podcast perspective? Because like for us, like we have some content that does like millions and millions of views, but it's all in person. It's not remote anymore. What's your thought process on that?
So sorry, my thought process on
Like the future
getting
of
people in person.
the future of
The future of
podcasting
it.
and having it
Okay,
like in
got it,
more
got
in
it, got it.
person.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, did you see that interview with Lex Friedman and Mark Zuckerberg?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the one where they used the Meta Quest and they basically did it, through the goggles, right? And it looked really real. And this is just the very beginning right now. So I think that's what the future is. Like you and I will look like we're in person doing it, and I think that's just going to perform a lot better. So I don't think we're that far away from it. Maybe a couple years or so. And I'm like, I would love just to sit here and do it and not have to go to like I use my friend's office over here in LA, and it's just like we need to get the videographers in, and we have to coordinate everything. It's a pain in the butt. But I think even though we're going to have this new technology, I still think I'm going to do in person because, like, for example, this Friday, the podcast that we're doing. So I have Sahil Bloom in the morning at 10 a.m. and then we're gonna go to lunch together. Ali's gonna join for lunch along with his girlfriend, who's also a YouTube creator as well. And we're gonna be able to break bread like that. We're gonna have great conversations, and then hopefully Sahil and Ali's girlfriend will become good friends, and there'll be that connection, right? And then in the afternoon, I'm gonna do an hour and a half with Ali, and then he's gonna spend an hour and a half interviewing me, and that's gonna be a great day of content, right? Like that is like friendship plus content creation. That's cool.
And that's what it goes back to, right? If you go back to the core tendencies of like relationships, exchange information, it goes back to the core principles, and that's what you get so well out of being in person. And our next tour is coming up. It's going to be, we're doing one next week, but then another one in December, and it's all about in person. And it's costing a bomb, but like it's part of the long term, part of the long game, and it's better because I can meet these people, these 7, 8, and maybe 9-figure entrepreneurs actually in person. Before we finish up, I want to ask you one last question. How can someone get ahead in marketing today?
You said the word storytelling, and that word is overused, but not enough people spend enough time studying what that actually means. So the Harmon Circle, or the book I talked about, Storyworthy, or there's Donald Miller's book on stories, right? There's a lot that goes into it, and you're not going to become an expert overnight. So if you want to become an expert storyteller, one thing I would recommend doing is just creating a story bank, which means that every single day you're going to have a story. Just call out the most notable thing and then tell that story, right? And you're going to get better over time. Spend time, writing. Sometimes I do this. I just write into like an Apple doc, and I just write for like 10, 15 minutes. And then I'm going to have some threads in there that can become stories, right? So it's just like playing tennis. It's just like practicing jiu-jitsu or whatever. It takes time to compound it, and like takes time to compound a business. Takes time to also compound your storytelling too. So that's what I would say, because people gravitate towards that. And your storytelling goes into your creative. It goes into everything. If you want to lead people, if you want to convince people, if you want to convince people to join your team, it's going to take a really good story to get them to come over.
100%. That's a great way to finish up is people buy into you, right? At the end of the day, and you need to be able to sell that. So people think it's sales, but it's actually just how you get across your story. So Eric, I want to say a massive thank you. This was a great session. I really appreciate it. Anything I can do for you, I want to say, a big thank you, and always extend my help.
Appreciate it. Yeah, no, Darren, this is great. Great questions. Thank you for doing your research. And again, appreciate it.
Of course.